Havenwood's most exclusive private nightclub breathed with quiet, unspoken luxury. Deep bass hummed through polished marble floors, vibrating beneath every guest's feet, while dim neon blue and rose lights sliced through thin clouds of vanilla and bourbon smoke. The air hummed with low laughter, clinking crystal glassware, and the muted chatter of billionaires, investors, and old socialite elites who ruled the city. To anyone watching, it was just another glamorous Havenwood night. But for me and Marlowe, it was the end of the freedom we'd spent 6 years fighting to obtain. We were outsiders, two ordinary modern girls who'd transmigrated straight into the pages of a dark obsessive romance novel and been handed the cruelest side roles possible. I became Clara, the permanent disposable stand-in mistress for Cale Rayner, Havenwood's coldest, most controlling billionaire tycoon, a man who treated affection as ownership and people as temporary toys to fill his empty hours until his true obsession returned. Marlowe became Elias Voss's unloved, overlooked wife, married only for social prestige and public image, while Elias spent every year pining relentlessly for Lila Mercer, the novel's canonical, untouchable heroine. From the start, we refused to play the tragic, heartbroken fools the plot demanded us to be. For 3 years, we lived a calculated double life. In public, we performed perfect, pitiful devotion. I lingered helplessly at Cale's side, looking desperate and starved for his fleeting attention, while Marlowe faded silently into the background of Elias's high-powered career. The invisible, unlovable wife no one noticed. Behind closed doors, we were far from helpless. We swiped their unlimited black corporate cards, drained their luxury accounts, and quietly stashed away a massive, untraceable offshore fortune, penny by penny, building the escape fund that would one day set us free. We endured every empty gala, every cold night, every fake smile, simply waiting for our window to... That window arrived the second Lila Mercer returned to Haven. We knew the novel's every line, every character impulse, every inevitable plot shift. Lila was the core of both men's obsession, the only person they would ever truly... Once she was back, we became completely redundant, nothing more than old placeholders ready to be discarded, replaced, and... Worse, we knew how ruthless Cale and Elias could be once their true fixation returned. We would be abandoned, humiliated, and possibly destroyed once we no longer served a purpose. Rather than wait for our scripted tragic endings, we chose to rewrite our fates entirely. On a cold, torrential rainy night 3 years ago, we staged a brutal, believable double car crash on a remote mountain highway outside the city. We left wrecked vehicles, scattered personal belongings, and carefully planted forensic evidence to seal the illusion. Local authorities ruled it a tragic accidental death for 2 lonely, heartbroken women with no close family left to grieve. Cale and Elias held empty funerals, buried empty caskets for the women they'd pretended about, and quickly refocused all their attention on change. The entire city moved on, erasing us from memory. We slipped away undetected, resettling in a tiny, quiet coastal town hundreds of miles away, finally free from Havenwood's toxic. For 3 peaceful years, we lived normally for the first time since transmigrating. Marlowe opened a small oceanfront art studio, painting soft seascapes and teaching local children lessons, healing slowly from the loneliness of her fake marriage. I took simple, low-profile freelance marketing work, living modestly and avoiding all luxury and high society ties. We cut every connection to our old lives. New phones, new emails, no social media, no visits to the city, no mention of the billionaires who'd once controlled. We were careful, disciplined, and invisible, and for a long while, we truly believed we'd discover. But freedom bred us. Tired of hiding in constant fear, tired of living like fugitives even after we paid our dues, Marlowe begged me for one single night of normalcy, one anonymous night in Havenwood to dress up, dance, laugh, and feel like regular young women instead of runaway fictional characters. Against every instinct I had, I agreed. We dressed simply, wore minimal makeup, and blended into the nightclub crowd, unrecognizable from the glamorous, pining women we'd wanted to be. For hours, we were safe, careless, and happy, convinced our past was us. The night shattered in a single second. Marlowe froze mid-laugh, her face draining of all color. Following her gaze, I spotted Elias Voss across the VIP section, surrounded by his partners. The second his eyes locked onto Marlowe, sharp, clear recognition flashed across his features. His easy smile dropped, his entire demeanor shifting from casual socialite to calculating predator. He excused himself from his group and began walking toward us slowly, methodically, with the quiet certainty of a man who has just uncovered I. Panted through me. I could not let Elias take Marlowe back, could not let him ruin the gentle peace he'd built. Pressing urgent instructions into her ear, I told her to run through the back service exit, sprint to the parking garage, and drive straight toward the coastal stopping. I would distract Elias, buy her time to flee the city, and meet her later at the brief spot. Terrified but trusting me, Marlowe squeezed my hand and vanished into the crowd. I turned forward, ready to face Elias and fabricate every lie I could to delay him, only to crash violently into a solid chest. A firm, unyielding hand wrapped around my upper arm, stopping me cold. The nightclub's music, chatter, and noise all faded into distant static. I did not need to know who held me. No one else carried that bone-chilling aura of quiet, obsessive dominance. When I lifted my head, his dark, fathomless eyes were fixed on me. No shock, no surprise. Only cold triumph. He watched me stumble, watched my panic, and knew every secret I'd spent 3 years hiding. With unhurried, deliberate movements, he unknotted the black silk tie from his collar. Before I could stammer out excuses or pleas, he silenced me with a low, commanding tone. He wrapped the tie firmly around my wrists, binding my hands together tight to eliminate all struggle. Place. You worry about running yourself first, Clara, he murmured, his voice low and lethal. In that moment, I understood the horrifying truth. Marlowe flee. He had watched me send her away. He had chosen to let her take me captive instead. I begged him to let me go, promising I would disappear forever, show my face again. Hale only leaned closer, his gaze burning with years of buried fixation and unforgotten betrayal. He told me plainly that he had known I was alive every single day after our stage crash. He had never believed I was dead. He had simply waited, patiently, endlessly, for me to make one surface. Across the club, Elias had stopped advancing. His sharp eyes looked on our restrained confrontation as he pieced together the full truth of our fake deaths, our stolen fortune, and our 3-year escape. Our perfect secret was fully exposed. Kyle tightened his grip on my arm, bringing me toward the private exit. Verdict unshakable. After 3 years of stolen freedom, the game was finally over, and this time, I would be allowed to disappear again. The tinted sedan glided silently through Havenwood's glittering downtown streets, cutting past rows of neon-lit bars and towering glass skyscrapers, before veering into the private underground garage of Kyle Rayner's central penthouse. The entire ride was drowned in suffocating silence, bound wrists resting stiffly in my lap. I sat frozen beside the man I'd spent 3 years evading, every nerve in my body strung tight with dread. There was no anger in his demeanor, no explosive frustration, only a quiet, watchful stillness that scared me far more than any outburst. Cale had always been a man who waited patiently before striking, and I knew he was biding his time, dissecting every detail of my sudden, reckless return. The garage's heavy metal door sealed shut behind the car, shutting out every trace of the outside world. When Cale finally exited and pulled me after him, his grip on my arm steady and unescapable, I felt the last flicker of my fragile hope fade. This penthouse was the same gilded cage I'd inhabited during my years as his fake mistress, minimalist, immaculate, and painfully familiar, filled with cold marble surfaces and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the entire city skyline. It held no warmth, no comfort, only the ghosts of the lies I'd once lived to survive. The private elevator ascended soundlessly, and I kept my gaze fixed on the metal floor, too afraid to meet his eyes. My mind spiraled endlessly around Marlowe. I'd sent her running from the nightclub, praying she'd outrun Elias and reach our safe coastal hideaway. But I had no way of knowing if she'd made it, no way of contacting her, no way of confirming she was safe. Every passing second of silence amplified my guilt. I'd traded my freedom for hers, but I could only hope my sacrifice had not been in vain. The elevator doors slid open to reveal the vast, empty penthouse living room. Cale released his hold on me and stepped forward, tossing his tailored jacket over the back of a leather sofa before crossing to the bar cart in the corner. He poured a glass of amber whiskey without a single glance in my direction, his movements slow, deliberate, and unrushed. He was drawing out my anxiety, letting the weight of my captivity sink in before confronting me with the truth he'd spent 3 years chasing. He ordered at last, his voice low and unyielding. I obeyed silently, sinking onto the edge of the cold leather couch, my bound wrists still throbbing faintly from the silk tie he'd used to restrain me at the club. Though I'd stopped struggling, every muscle remained coiled, ready to fight or flee if given the smallest opening. I knew better than to underestimate him. He was not just a billionaire tycoon. He was a man obsessed, unaccustomed to loss, and infinitely cruel to those who dared to betray. When he finally turned to face me, glass in hand, his dark eyes swept over my face, sharp and penetrating, as if he was searching for every change 3 years of freedom had carved into me. "You've changed," he said quietly, his tone audible. Quieter, barrier, but still reckless enough to sneak back into the city, thinking you could avoid me. I lifted my chin, clinging to the last scraps of my I wasn't sneaking back. We were just passing through. We had no intention of crossing past you. A faint, mocking smile tugged at his lips. You keep using... He took a slow sip of his drink. His gaze never... The girl who ran. Your partner. The one you sent away to save while you stayed behind me. My heart dropped. I'd known he'd seen Marlowe flee the nightclub, but I'd hoped he'd only caught a fleeting glimpse, unable to identify her or piece together our... That hope shattered instantly. He knew I had an accomplice. He knew our fake deaths had been a coordinated scheme, not escape. I clamped my jaw shut, refusing to wait. Protecting Marlowe was the only priority I had left. After 6 years of relying on each other to survive the novel's cruel plot, after 3 years of building a peaceful life together, I would never hand her over to the dangerous world. Cale stepped closer, towering over me, the warmth of his body cutting through the room's cool air. He knelt before me, his movements surprisingly gentle, and reached for my wrists. With slow precision, he untied the silk tie that had bound me for hours, freeing my skin and revealing faint red indentations left by the tight restraint. His thumb brushed lightly over the marks, a soft gesture that felt utterly contradictory to him. "You think hiding her will protect her?" he murmured, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I've had 3 years to dig into your so-called accident. 3 years to track missing detail, every insistent record, every vanished transaction. I've known you were alive long, Clara. I've just been waiting to take." My breath caught in my throat. I'd believed our staged crash was flawless, our trail fully erased, our off traceable. But Cale's resources were endless, his potence unmatched. He had believed I was dead. He simply bided his time, letting me live in false freedom until I was on my own. Before I laid a reply, he stood and crossed to his floor-to-ceiling desk, unlocking a sleek drawer and pulling out a thick manila folder. He carried it back and dropped it heavily on the glass coffee table before me, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Inside were printed bank records, offshore transfer receipts, and time-stamped luxury purchases. Every secret financial move we'd made during our 3 years of scamming him black and white. "You drained millions from my account," he said flatly, his tone devoid of emotion. "You pretended to love me, played the lonely, pining mistress for years, all while plotting to rob me blind and without a second thought. You thought I was too blind, too obsessed to notice. I was surviving," I shot back, fear sharpening into desperate anger. "This world was never mine. I was never meant to be your mistress, your placeholder, your anything. I did what I had to do to escape a life that would exist." Kyle's gaze darkened, his calm finally cracking to reveal the possessive fury beneath. "You were mine, whether you chose it or not, and no one leaves me, not without consequences." The room fell dead silent, the weight of his promise settling cold and heavy in my chest. Just as I opened my mouth to argue, the small burner phone hidden in my clutch buzzed once, low and unmistakable. It was Marlowe's emergency line, the untraceable number we'd reserved for desperate situations. Cale's eyes locked instantly on my bag, his expression hard and wavering certainty. He knew exactly who was calling, exactly what this meant for us both. Without raising his voice, he issued a command that stripped away every last shred of my control. "Answer it. Speakerphone. And if you lie to me again, I'll find her before the sun rises." My fingers froze over the clutch, every muscle locking up at Cale's cold, uncompromising command. The burner phone buzzed a second time, quieter this time, like Marlowe was waiting anxiously on the other end. clinging to the faint hope that I was safe. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the distant hum of the penthouse's ventilation system. I knew Marlowe would never call unless something was wrong. We'd programmed strict rules for our emergency line. No check-ins, no casual updates, only life-threatening crises. The fact that she was ringing me now meant she hadn't reached safety, that somewhere along her escape route, trouble had found her. I darted a quick, desperate glance toward Cale, searching for any trace of mercy in his sharp, unyielding features. But his dark eyes were hard and fixed, every ounce of his focus pinned on me, unblinking and predatory. He was not bluffing. I could hear the quiet certainty in his tone, the unspoken promise that he would burn every coastal town, track every hidden record, and tear apart every corner of the state to find Marlowe if I dared to lie or delay. His wealth and influence stretched across every industry in Havenwood and beyond. There was no hiding from him long-term. Not once he set his mind to hunting someone down. Defeat settled heavy in my chest, sharp and bitter. I'd spent 3 years building safety for Marlowe and myself, only to unravel it all in one reckless night of freedom. Slowly, trembling faintly, I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small black burner phone. The screen lit up, displaying the unknown masked number that belonged exclusively to Marlowe. My throat tightened. One wrong word, one shaky inflection, and Cale would piece together every last detail of our secret lie. I pressed the answer button and tapped the speakerphone icon, the sound echoing crisply through the silent penthouse. Clara? Marlowe's voice came through the line, quiet and breathless, edged with raw panic. I'm stuck. Elias spotted my car on the highway. He's following me. I can't shake him off. My blood turned icy. Every worst-case scenario I'd imagined crashed over me at once. I'd sent her away to protect her, to let her outrun the pain and danger of our old life. And instead, I'd led Elias straight to her. Guilt twisted sharp and burning in the gut, overwhelming every ounce of fear I held for my own cavity. Psalm, I said quickly, forcing my voice steady, careful not to send any hidden warning that would alert. Keep driving. Stick to the main roads. Don't take any dark sides. Before Marlowe could reply, Cale stepped forward smoothly, leaning down to speak directly into the phone. His tone was low, polite, and terrifyingly calm, the kind of gentle intimidation that made my bones cold. Marlowe, he said, drawing her name out slowly, like he was tasting a secret he'd spent years waiting to uncover. No need to run any longer. Over. Dead silence hung on the line for 3 full heartbeats. I could practically feel Marlowe's shock. The way her breath must have caught throat. The terror of realizing both billionaires now knew the truth of their Kyle? She whispered. Elias is tailing you because he's finally woken up to the lie you built. Cale continued, unfazed by her fear. But I'm giving you a choice. Pull over at the North Highway rest stop in the next 10 minutes. And we end this quietly. Keep running, and I'll flag your vehicle in every state database within the hour. You won't out us forever. I shot Cale a furious glare, my defiance flaring back to life. Leave her out of this. This is between you and me. She had nothing to do with it. Cale's gaze snapped back to mine, sharp and unforgiving. Don't lie for her anymore, Clara. I've seen the bank logs. I've tracked the lease on your coastal houses. I know you two built a new life together, funded entirely by the money you stole from me and Elias. You think I'd let either of you walk free after that betrayal? On the line, Marlowe let out a quiet, broken breath. Clara, I'm so sorry. I'm the one who wanted to come back tonight. I'm the one. It's not your fault. I rushed to reassure her, my voice tight. Don't blame yourself. Just focus. Kyle ended the conversation before I could say more, reaching out to end the call with a single tap of his finger. The phone went dark instantly, cutting off Marlowe's voice and leaving us alone in the suffocating silence of the penthouse once more. He tossed the burner phone onto the glass table beside a folder of evidence, the small device clinking softly against the surface, a final mark in freedom. He sank down onto the sofa directly in front of me, his knees brushing mine, closing every last bit of distance between us. There was no more anger in his expression, no more cold fury, only a hollow, unreadable intensity that was more unsettling. 3 years ago, you left me with nothing but empty rooms and unanswered questions, he said quietly. I spent wondering if you were dead, if I'd wasted years caring for never cared back. I buried you, I grieved you, and all that time, you were living happily somewhere else, spending my existed. I stared at him, stunned by the raw vulnerability beneath his sharp words. I'd always assumed he'd never cared about me, that I was nothing more than a temporary distraction from Lila, a tool of loneliness and ego. I'd never imagined he'd grieved my fake death, never guessed he'd clung for me at all. You didn't care about me, I argued weakly, the fight draining slowly from my voice. You cared about possession, about control, something you owned. Cale's hand lifted, his finger brushing lightly over my cheek. His touch had any right to be. Possession the only way I knew how to keep you. You were never just a placeholder, not for me. Before I could process his confession, the penthouse intercom buzzed sharply. A security voice crackled through the speaker, crisp and formal. Mr. Rayner, Mr. Voss is requesting immediate entry. He states he has urgent business regarding the male subjects you've been tracking. My stomach dropped. Elias was here. He'd followed the trail, figured out Kyle had captured me, and come to claim long-lost fake wife. The two men we'd conned, lied to, and abandoned were finally in the same room by our years of deception. Cale's jaw tightened, his jaw cracking once more. Send him up. He turned back to me, his gaze hardening into unyielding resolve. The four of us are finally going to have the conversation you spent 3 years running from. No more lies, no more hiding. This time, every secret comes out. The faint chime of the penthouse elevator sliced through the heavy silence, sharp and final. Each echoing vibration amplified the panic coiled tight in my chest, my breath catching unevenly as I stared toward the polished metal doors. After 3 years of careful hiding, of fake deaths and stolen freedom, the four of us were about to collide at last. There was no more running, no more lies, no more quiet escape. Every secret Marlowe and I had buried was about to be dragged into the cold, unforgiving light of truth, laid bare for the two men we'd spent years deceiving. Cale rose slowly from the sofa, his tall frame stretching to its full imposing height. He moved to stand beside me, not touching, but his presence pressed inescapably against my side, a silent reminder of my captivity. His previously vulnerable expression hardened into cold, unyielding composure, every trace of softness vanishing in an instant. Whatever private grief or longing he'd harbored for me was locked away, replaced by the ruthless tycoon who controlled every deal, every secret, and every person in his orbit. He was ready for confrontation, ready to unravel every thread of our elaborate lie. The elevator doors slid open without warning, and Elias Voss stepped into the penthouse. He carried none of Cale's quiet stillness. His energy was sharp, restless, and razor-edged with suppressed fury. His tailored suit was slightly rumpled from the highway chase, his dark hair disheveled, his usual polished composure fraying at the edges. Unlike Cale, who'd waited patiently for my mistake, Elias had spent the entire night chasing a ghost, and his anger blazed openly in his icy gray eyes. His gaze swept instantly across the room, skipping past Cale and locking directly on me, sharp and accusatory. Where is she? He demanded, his voice low and gritty with barely contained rage. Marlowe. I tracked her car all the way to the city limits before she vanished. You two planned this together, didn't you? I stiffened, ready to defend my best friend. But Cale spoke before I could utter a single word. She's fine. I gave her a choice. Surrender peacefully, or be hunted. His tone was calm and unrushed, a deliberate contrast to Elias's volatility. She'll be here soon enough. For now, we settled. Elias stepped further into the penthouse, the elevator sliding shut silently behind him, sealing the four of us, even with Marlowe still absent, inside the gilded cage we'd all once. His eyes darted to the evidence folder on the glass table, then to the discarded burner phone, and a bitter, hollow laugh escaped. So it's true. The fatal crash, the closed case, the public mourning, all a lie. They stole from us, faked their deaths, and vanished to live happily ever after, while we grieved empty. The words stung, sharp and filtered, but I refused to look away. For years we'd been painted as the pitiful, lovelorn fools in lives. Me, the desperate mistress. Marlowe, the neglect. Now the table had turned, and we were the villains in their carefully crafted. We didn't steal to hurt you, I said quietly, lifting my chin in quiet defiance. We stole to survive. You two never saw us as human beings. I was Cale's convenient distraction until Lila returned. Marlowe was your decorative wife to boost your social status. We were never allowed to want anything for ourselves. Took it. Elias's gaze snapped back to me, sharp and disbelieving. You think we were blind to your suffering? You think I didn't see Marlowe's loneliness every single night she sat alone in our mansion? You saw it and you didn't care, I shot back, fear fading into long bent. You were too busy chasing Lila, too busy climbing the social ladder, to notice the woman married to you waking. We had two choices: rot in your shadow for the rest of our lives, or run. We chose to run. A tense, heavy silence fell over the room. Elias's jaw tightened, his sharp features hardening with unreadable emotion. For the first time since I'd known him, he had no retort, no cold remark, no calculated deflection. The truth hung thick between us, unassailable and raw. Cale shifted beside me, his hand brushing lightly against my shoulder in a silent gesture. "We were careless with you," he admitted, the words reluctant. "But careless does not justify betrayal. You drained millions, faked your deaths, vanished without a word. You left us to grieve for people who were never truly gone." "Grieve?" I repeat, bitter and hollow. "You grieved the loss of your prop, Cale, not me. You grieved the loss of someone who worked the ground you walked on, someone who never dared to question you, worshipping you." I'm disposable. His fingers tapped my shoulder, his dark eyes clouding with a conflict I could not decipher. Anger, longing, frustration, and hurt tangled together in a storm of unspoken emotion. "You were never disposable. That was the mistake I spent years regretting." Before I could process his words, the penthouse hissed once again. The security voice sounded tense, hesitant this time. "Mr. Rayner, Ms. Hale has arrived. Requesting entry alone." My heart lurched violently. Marlowe was here. She'd chosen to surrender, to walk straight back into the life she spent 3 years escaping. All because my reckless choice to return to Havenwood raveled our perfect freedom. Elias's entire body went rigid, his gaze locking on the intercom speaker like a man finally receiving the answer to a years-long obsession. "Send her up," he said, his voice rougher than before. The wait that followed was agonizingly slow. Every second stretched into eternity as we all stood frozen in tense silence. No one speaking, no one moving. The divide in the room was clear. Cale and Elias stood side by side, two powerful men united by betrayal, while I stood alone, for my best friend to join me, to face the consequence together. The elevator doors opened again. Marlowe stepped into the room, ached at the sight of her. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted, her hair messy from the hot chase and endless stress. She looked small and fragile, stripped of the quiet confidence she'd built in her coastal life, reduced once again to the quiet, scared girl who in Elias's shadow. Her eyes found mine instantly, filled with guilt and apology, and I shook my head subtly, silently telling her it was not her fault, that we were in this together. Before anyone could react. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping directly in front of Marlowe, his gaze sweeping over her face like he was memorizing every detail thought he'd lost forever. "You're alive," he whispered, the words raw and unguarded, all his usual arrogance. Marlowe held her ground, her voice quiet but steady. "I'm alive, and but I'm not sorry we ran." The 4 of us stood frozen in the center of the vast penthouse. 4 lives tangled irreversibly together by years of lies, secrets, obsession, and regret. The old script was broken, the fake deaths exposed, the stolen freedom shattered. There were no more placeholders, no more hidden lives running from the truth. Cale's gaze swept over all of us, his tone final and as he broke the heavy silence. "The past 3 years are over. From tonight onward, you don't get to hide anymore. You don't get to run. But you broke, together." I knew in that moment our coastal freedom was truly gone. We were trapped once again in the world we'd escaped, bound to the 2 men who'd once controlled our lives. And this time, there was no second chance to disappear. Cale's verdict hung thick in the penthouse air, cold and unshakable, stripping away every last trace of the quiet freedom Marlowe and I had clung to for 3 years. The vast floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Havenwood's glittering midnight skyline, but the brilliant city lights felt distant and hollow, no different from the gilded glass walls trapping us inside. There was no more evasion, no more secret hideaways, no more anonymous coastal days where we'd been just 2 ordinary girls, free from obsession and control. Our lie was laid bare, our rebellion dismantled, and the 2 men we'd abandoned stood before us, ready to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the 4 of us. The tension hummed sharp and volatile, thick enough to choke on. Elias's gaze never left Marlowe, his gray eyes fixed intently on her face, raw with a tangled mix of suppressed anger, lingering disbelief, and a quiet, desperate longing I'd never once seen in him during our years trapped in the novel's script. He'd spent 3 years mourning a wife he'd never cherished properly in life, and now that she was standing alive before him, he had no idea how to process the flood of unspoken emotions he'd buried beneath his career, an endless fixation on Lila Mercer. Marlo shifted subtly on her feet, her shoulders tensing under his unrelenting stare. She'd spent so long shrinking into the background of his life, conditioned to bow to his will and fade into invisibility, that the intensity of his unwavering focus clearly unsettled her. Yet she held her ground, her jaw set firmly, refusing to cower the way she once had. The 3 years of peace had hardened her, gifting her a quiet courage the old, trapped Marlo had never possessed. Cale's hand still rested lightly on my shoulder, his touch a quiet, possessive anchor that grounded me in place and warned me against any further attempt to run. His gaze swept slowly over Marlo and Elias before settling back on me, dark and unfathomable, holding layers of regret, frustration, and a twisted devotion I could not begin to unpack. He was done letting me slip through his fingers, done waiting for me to return, done grieving the empty ghost of the girl he'd once refused to value. "Fix what we broke?" I repeated quietly, my voice cutting through the heavy silence, sharp with lingering defiance. My muscles coiled tight, every instinct screaming to defend the life we'd fought so hard to build. We didn't break anything. We saved ourselves. You two spent years taking from us, our youth, our peace, our sense, and we only took back what we were owed to survive. Kyle's fingers tightened faintly on my shoulder, his tone dropping low and survival does not grant you the right to vanish without a word, to drain my accounts, to bury yourselves in a fake grave and leave us to grieve empty. You rewrote your fates without a single thought for the wreckage you left behind. What wreckage? I shot back, bitterness flaring hot in my chest. You had Lila to fall back on. You had your empire, your wealth, your endless social connections. We had nothing but each other. We were always nothing but side characters in your party. This time, it was Elias spoke, his voice rough and uncharacteristically unguarded. There was no perfect story. He nodded to Marlo, his gaze softening minutely, a crack in his usual cold, calculating. I spent 3 years wondering what wrong, wondering why the quiet warmth I'd taken for granted vanished. I chased Lila for years, blind, foolish, thinking she was the answer to every empty space in my life. But when Marlo was gone, I realized I'd been chasing the wrong person. Marlo's breath hitched faintly, shock flickering across her delicate. It was the first time Elias had ever acknowledged her existence beyond a decorative social accessory. The first time he'd admitted his endless fixation on the canonical heroine had been a hollow, meaningless mistake. For years, she'd loved him quietly, painfully, from the shadows, only to be overlooked and discarded. Now that she was free of him, It doesn't matter, Marlo said softly, though her voice whirred slightly, betraying her inner turmoil. It doesn't matter what you realized after I was gone. You never cared when I was alive and beside you. I don't want your Elias. I don't want your belated attention. I just want my life back. Your life? Elias stepped forward, closing the small distance between them, his tone urgent and tight. The life you built running from your mistakes? A tiny coastal town, anonymous days, endless hiding? That is not a life, Marlo. Survival. The same small, cramped survival you claim to escape. The argument hung in the air, unresolvable and raw. 2 worlds collided in a penthouse room. The quiet, peaceful freedom we fought and bled for, and the gilded, obsessive abandoned. Neither understand the other. To us, hiding was freedom. To them, freedom meant existing within their orbit, under their protection. Kyle turned gently to face him, his dark eyes locking mine in place, leaving no room to look away. You think I was blind to your pain, Clara? He murmured, his voice soft enough I could hear it. I knew you were lonely. I knew you felt replaceable. I was selfish. I kept you close because you were the only person who ever saw me. Not my money, not my power, not my reputation. Just me. I was too stubborn, too proud to admit I knew before you were gone. His confession stunned me silent. I'd spent years convinced he felt nothing for me beyond possession and ego, convinced I was merely a temporary distraction, empty nights. I'd never imagined he'd truly seen me, beneath the performative and fake smiles. Before I could process his words, Cale dropped his hand on my shoulder and stepped back, his expression hardening once more into unyielding authority. But regret does not erase betrayal. You two will stay in Havenwood. No more coastal escapes, no more anonymous lives, no more running. You will turn to the lives you abandoned, but this time, there will be between us. Panic flared sharp and desperate in my chest. You can't do that. You can't trap us here again. I already have. Cale's tone was final, unnegotiable. I've frozen all your offshore accounts. Every dollar you stole is locked until I decide otherwise. Your coastal houses are under surveillance. Every route out of state is flagged. You have no money, no saving, no way to run again. My blood turned icy cold. We'd spent years carefully hiding our fortune, layering accounts and fake identities to secure our freedom, believing our savings were untouchable. But Cale's power stretched further than we'd ever dared to imagine. He'd stripped us of every safety net we'd built, leaving us completely vulnerable at his mercy. Elias turned to Marlowe, his tone softer, but equally resolute. You will stay with me. We will fix what I broke. I will give you everything I withheld before, attention, respect, you once craved. Marlowe shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed frustration and despair. I don't want your stability. I want my freedom back. Freedom got you hunted tonight, Elias countered quietly. Freedom got you run down a highway in fear for your life. Freedom got you caught. The cruel truth of his words settled heavy over us. Our reckless night of careless joy had cost us everything. We'd traded 3 years of perfect peace for captivity, dragged back into the toxic obsessive orbit we escaped. There was a way out. No backup plan, loophole to save us now. Cale glanced between the four of us, gaze sharp and decisive. You will remain in the penthouse tonight. Tomorrow we resume normal life. Clara returns to my side. Marlowe returns to Elias's. The world will believe our lost women have finally come home. Never know the truth of your fake deaths. I stared at him in horrified disbelief. He wasn't just trapping us in Havenwood. He was forcing us back into our old scripted roles, erasing every ounce of progress we'd made, of the new selves we'd fought to become. As if the night couldn't grow any worse, penthouse intercom buzzed once more. The security voice crackled through the speaker, calm and professional, dealing a final, devastating blow. Mr. Rayner, Ms. Lila Mercer has landed at the private. She is en route to the penthouse now. My heart dropped completely. The true heroine of the novel was coming home. The woman Cale and Elias were canonically obsessed with, the person we'd spent years fearing was about to walk through the door. The old story was waking up again. Joe and I were no longer hidden fugitives. We were right back in the center of the chaotic, obsessive plot we'd died to escape. The intercom's announcement lingered in the air like a death sentence, cold and unshakable, freezing every breath in the room. For 6 years, Lila Mercer had been the invisible shadow hanging over our lives, the untouchable, perfect heroine whose existence dictated every miserable role Marlowe and I were forced to play. We were the backups, the placeholders, the temporary distractions for Cale and Elias until their one true obsession returned. For 3 years of stolen freedom, we'd buried that fear deep down, convincing ourselves we'd escaped the novel's cruel script entirely. But now she was here, speeding toward this penthouse, and the old plot was clawing its way back to life, ready to swallow us whole once again. A sharp, brittle tension rippled through the four of us. Cale's jaw tightened subtly, his fleeting softness toward me vanishing in an instant, replaced by the quiet, anticipatory focus he'd always reserved for Lila. Beside him, Elias straightened his rumpled suit, his haunted gaze tearing away from Marlowe for the first time since she'd stepped into the room, flicking toward the elevator doors with faint, ingrained eagerness. It was a reflex, carved into him by years of blind, relentless fixation, and my chest twisted with bitter familiarity. No matter their late epiphanies, no matter their regret for losing us, Lila would always be their default weakness. Marlowe felt it too. Her shoulders slumped faintly, the quiet courage she'd clung to all night fraying at the edges. She lifted her eyes to meet mine, her gaze glistening with quiet despair, and I saw the old insecurity creep back in, the fear of never being enough, of always being second best to the perfect, untouchable heroine. After 3 years of building self-worth away from Elias's shadow, one single incoming arrival was enough to unravel her confidence entirely. I crossed the room in 2 quick steps, closing the distance between us, and squeezed her hand tightly in a silent promise. We were in this together, just like we'd been in every fight, every escape, every quiet, peaceful day we'd ever shared. Lila's return changed nothing between us. We were still each other's only real safety net in this twisted world. "Stay steady," I whispered, low enough only she could hear. "We're not the same girls we were before." Her fingers tightened around mine, a faint, grateful acknowledgement, but the worry in her eyes didn't. We both knew the truth. The novel's core pull was unbreakable. Lila was born to command these two men's attention, devotion and obsession, while we were always meant to fall to the sidelines, forgotten and discarded. Cale noticed our quiet exchange, his dark gaze sharp and assessing as it swept over our joined hands. A faint, possessive flicker crossed his features, irritation edging into his tone. "No more alliances built on running. From this moment on, you both answer to the lives you've chosen to." "We didn't choose them," snapped, turning to face him, defiance flaring bright in my chest once more. "You forced them on us. You froze our money, surveilled our homes, cut off every single escape route we had. Don't pretend this is..." Kyle took a step toward me, his towering frame casting a cold shadow over me, his voice low and dangerous. "I gave you a choice once. You chose to leave. Now you choose to stay in." Before I could argue, the elevator chimed softly, cutting through our confrontation. The sound was deceptively gentle, yet it sent a jolt of pure primal panic through my bones. After years of dreading this moment, the heroine of our nightmare was finally standing on the other side. The doors slid open slowly, and Lila Mercer stepped into the penthouse. Bathed in the soft, warm glow of the hallway lighting, she was everything the novel had promised. Ethereal, effortlessly graceful, with soft features, gentle eyes, and a quiet charisma that drew every gaze in the room. Dressed in a simple white coat and tailored dress, her hair loose and natural, she looked like pure, uncomplicated goodness, the perfect contrast to our sharp battles. It was easy to see why Cale and Elias had spent years obsessed, why they'd overlooked every loyal, quiet thing Marlowe. Lila's gaze swept curiously across the room, taking in the tense atmosphere, the four of us frozen in place, the unspoken conflict thick in the air. Her eyes widened slightly when she spotted me and Marlowe, clear surprise flickering across her delicate features. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice warm and gentle, perfectly matching her canonical persona. "I didn't realize you had guests. I was told the penthouse was private tonight." Elias was the first to recover, step forward instantly, his earlier remorse for Marlowe buried beneath years of ingrained habit. "Lila, you're right on time." His tone softened completely, the cold edge of his authority melting away into quiet warmth, a kindness I'd never once heard him offer Marlowe in years of marriage. The unfairness of it burned hot and sharp. Marlowe stood frozen beside me, her face pale, watching the man who'd just claimed to regret losing her light up for another woman without a second thought. It was a cruel, immediate reminder that belated apologies meant nothing. His purpose changed. Cale moved forward as well, but he didn't me entirely. He kept one hand loosely at my back, a subtle, unmissable claim, his gaze locking briefly on Lila before returning to me, deliberate. "They're not guests," he said flatly, his tone room for argument. "Clara and Marlowe have returned after a long absence." Lila's eyes widened further, pure relief crossing her face. "Returned? I heard about the accident 3 years ago. I thought you two were..." She trailed off, shaking her head in quiet shock, her gaze darting between me and Marlowe. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea you'd survived." Her sympathy seemed genuine, soft and unforced, but I could feel the shift in the room's dynamic. The balance of power had tilted entirely. Lila's presence rewrote every interaction, every emotion, every fragile toward tonight. The men's regret, their confessions, of making amends. All of it was already fading his return. "It's a long story," Marlowe said quietly, her voice steady despite the hurt in her eyes, to tell. Lila stepped further into the room, the elevator doors sliding shut behind her, sealing all 5 of us in the penthouse prison. She glanced between the tense faces of Kyle and Elias, then back to us, and growing serious. "I came back to Havenwood to settle some personal affairs, but I never expected to walk into something like this. Are you all right?" "We're fine," I answered before either man could speak, my tone sharp and honest. "We were free until tonight." Cale's hand pressed firmer against my back, a silent warning to hold my tongue, but I refused to back down. I was done pretending to be the docile, compliant mistress of the old script. Lila's return didn't scare me anymore, not after everything we'd survived. Yet even as I stood my ground, I could feel that stirring to life again. Elias's eyes lingered on Lila, soft and admiring, while Cale's attention split between me and the heroine he'd spent years craving. Marla and I were no longer dead and forgotten, but we were once again trapped in the middle of a love meant to include us. Lila smiled gently, oblivious to the storm of tension swirling around her. Well, I'm glad you're both alive. Hopefully we can get properly acquainted while I'm in town. Her innocent words settled like a weight on my chest. There would be no escaping this now. The 5 of us were tangled together indefinitely. The fake deaths, the stolen freedom, the men's belated regrets, none of it mattered anymore. The original story was awake, and Marlo and I were forced to play our old roles once more, caught between 2 obsessive billionaires and the person who would always outshine us. As Lila settled into the room, completely unaware of the year of pain and deception she'd walked into, I felt Cale lean down beside my ear, his voice low and cold enough to send a fresh shiver down my spine. Watch carefully. Clara, this time you're not just a placeholder. You're my choice, and Lila will learn that. Cale's quiet promise lingered in my ear, low and possessive, cutting through the soft, oblivious warmth Lila had brought into the penthouse. He swore the old novel script was broken, that I was no longer a placeholder, no longer a temporary distraction before the heroine's return. But after 6 years living bound to the cruel rules of this fictional world, I could not trust empty words. Lila Mercer was the core of every plotline, the unshakable center of Cale and Elias's long-bred obsession, and one night of belated regret would never erase years of ingrained, canonical longing. I pulled away from his touch, putting clear distance between us, my every movement sharp with unshaken defiance. I was no longer the docile, pining mistress who lingered in his shadow, grateful for every crumb of his attention. Marlo and I had fought too hard, suffered too long, and sacrificed everything to carve out our own freedom to fall back into the gilded cages we'd broken out of so easily. We were not side characters, not tools for their growth, not consolation prizes once the true heroine returned, and I would never pretend to be again. Lila wandered across the penthouse floor, her gaze drifting over the glittering Havenwood skyline, completely unaware of the years of pain and resentment layered into the quiet room. Gentle, kind, and effortlessly radiant, she embodied everything the novel had painted as perfect. It was only natural that Elias and Cale had spent years chasing her, blind to the women who'd stayed loyal and quiet through every ruthless chapter of their rise to power. To her, this was a harmless homecoming. To us, it was the return of our worst nightmare, the catalyst that had unraveled our 3 years of hard-won peace. This city still feels like home, Lila murmured with a soft smile, turning back to face us all. I never thought I'd return, but coming back feels right. I'm so shocked and so relieved to know you two survived that terrible accident 3 years ago. Her sympathy was genuine, warm and unguarded, yet it stung all the same. She had no idea how heavy our survival had been, how many nights we'd spent hiding in fear, how much we'd lost just to stay alive. She had no clue her existence had dictated every miserable moment of our trapped lives, that we'd spent years living in the cold shadow of her destined perfection. Before I could speak, Elias stepped forward instantly, gravitating toward her with the same unconscious, ingrained fondness that had broken Marlo's heart 1,000 times. His entire demeanor softened, the cold sharpness of his billionaire composure melting into easy hospitality, a tenderness he had never once offered his own. You're welcome here always, Elias said gently. Stay as long as you need. Anything you require is... Marlo's shoulders tensed beside me, a quiet, flinching hurt settling over her features. After a single night of hesitant remorse, after finally admitting he'd wasted his marriage chasing the wrong person, Elias fell straight back into his old... In that moment, every apology he'd offered fell, every regret a fleeting reaction to loss rather than genuine change. He would never see her, never cherish her, not when the novel's true heroine stood breathing in the sea. I laced my fingers tightly through those, pounding her, silently vowing that we would not let ourselves break again. We had escaped once, and we would find a way to escape again, even trapped in a city, even stripped of our funds, even cornered by the men who refused to. Lila politely declined his offer of shelter, explaining she'd already secured a private residence downtown, her eyes still wide with curiosity toward us. I can't imagine how difficult these past 3 years have been for you, she. living in hiding, cut off from everyone. You must have been. We were free, Marlo answered, her voice quiet but unyielding, no longer trembling with hurt. For the first time in our lives, happy. Afraid, yes, but free. Far happier than we ever were trapped in this city, playing second fiddle to a life that was. Lila's smile faltered, confusion flickering at her face, but she did further. Sensing the thick, unresolvable tension over the room, she made its exit, and Elias followed her to the elevator without a single backward glance at the woman he'd claimed to regret losing. The elevator doors slid shut behind them, and the penthouse fell into a suffocating, empty silence, leaving only Kale, Marlo, and me to face the wreckage of our. Kyle's expression hardened the second we were alone, the softness of his earlier confession fading into quiet frustration. You insist on fighting me at every turn, he said, his tone strained. I am trying to fix what broke, Clara. Choosing me means let me choose too. I shot back, lifting my chin, my voice steady with years of repressed exhaustion. You froze our money, surveilled our homes, cut off every route of escape and second chance. You hate that you lost me, but you still refuse to let me live for myself. Not love, Kale. That is possession, the same cruel control that trapped me. Start. He fell silent, his darks fixed on mine. Conflict swore deep within them. Longing, regret, stubborn pride, and the quiet terror of losing me again. For the first time in his life, he had no retort, no power play, no calculated manipulation to twist the situation in his favor. He stood the truth. He could own my presence, but he could miss. Marlo spoke up softly, her tone calm and final. Break silence. We're not your redemption stories. We're not here to fix your mistakes or cure your regrets. We spent 3 years building lives where we mattered, where we weren't invisible, weren't second best, weren't waiting for scraps of attention from men who. Kale stared at us for a lingering moment, before letting out a quiet, defeated breath. He walked slowly to his desk, unlocking the top drawer and sliding 2 small black cards across the glass table toward us, along with a set of Coastal House to document. I've unfrozen your account, he said quietly. All of your funds untouched. Your homes are no longer under surveillance. Travel flags are lifted. My breath caught in shock, my eyes wide unexpected surrender. I can keep you here, he continued, his voice rough with reluctant acceptance. I can lock you in this penthouse, force you to stay in my orbit, script with cruelty. But I've spent 3 years mourning your loss, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life watching you hate me. I thought brave freedom would make you mine, but all it did was prove I knew in the first place. It was the true elegy he had ever given me. No excuses, no manipulation, possessive demands. Raw, honest defeat. Go, he said finally, stepping back, dropping every claim he'd ever held over me. Live your lives. I won't chase you again. Marlo and I exchanged a stunned, disbelieving glance, relief crashing over us in overwhelming waves. After 6 years of captivity, 3 years of stolen freedom, and 1 brutal night of shattered hope, we were finally the ending we'd fought for. We did not hesitate. We grabbed our things, the keys, and our restored freedom, turning toward the elevator without a single backward look. There was no pity, lingering longing, no regret. We had spent too long suffering in their world to spare a second of sorrow we're leaving behind. As the elevator descended, leaving the penthouse and the broken men of our past far above us, I felt the last thread of the novel's cruel script snap clean in two. Lila, Elias, Kale, the obsessive love lines, the destined plots, the secondary role, none of it mattered anymore. We were no longer trapped in someone else's story. Outside the tower, the night air was cool and free. The haven would look menacing or confining. Marlo squeezed my hand, her eyes with tears of joy and relief, and walked side by side toward the highway, toward our quiet coastal town, toward the peaceful lives we'd earned. Run once, fallen. We had been caught, and we had fought our way free again. The script was fractured, broken, and permanently rewritten. No more hiding, no more fear, no more shadowed second lives. For the first time since transmigrated into this cruel world, we were truly, unconditionally free. Our story was finally perfectly ours, and it ended happily on our own terms.